Hi there. I want to present a new series where I'm going to look at the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah and particularly of the Tree of Life, which you see here represented without the 22 paths. It's just the 10 Sephira. Um, and in the Tree of Life form rather than the um, more egalitarian circle form, which I've also presented on this channel. Um, and it's being a series, of course. I'm going to look at each Sephiroth and each affirmation or affirmational phrase or exclamation, which you see here. That is to say, for example, engage, exclamation mark. I'm going to go through each of these in turn, not necessarily though in order. And this brings me on to a little bit of a note about studying the Kabbalah or Kabbalah. I've studied it for many years now, sporadically, um, neurotically, emotionally, uh, erratically, according to my life situation, which I think is actually what happens when you study the Kabbalah. It doesn't follow a linear path. You don't really start with Malkut and work up to Keter in a linear way. Well, you do maybe initially, for a weekend, but then after that, it becomes very much part of your own personal evolution, your own personal growth, which isn't linear, which is sort of a long and circuitous path, basically, to find the ninth gate, to quote from that movie. And Kabbalah is part of that journey. You make it part of your own journey once you begin to study it. And of course, to study the Kabbalah is to show devotion and piety to the forces and intelligences and spirits that lie behind the Kabbalah, of course, and the great and the various gods as well, the Elohim and the god El, or the gods of El. Um, so it's Kabbalah is one of the great achievements of scientific illuminism. It's the greatest metaphysical map that exists. It's the secret of the secrets, really. And it started off in a simple way, but over the centuries, it has evolved into a very, very, very complex system, which can pretty much explain everything in this particular universe and in many other universes. In fact, the multiverse, really. And it is the most extraordinary invention ever. In philosophical terms, explains natural science, it explains psychology, it explains relationships, it explains society. So you can only study the Kabbalah in your own life situation as it relates to your life situation, and of course the situation of your community and of the world at large, the world of the human. So it's basically that's my excuse anyway. Other people have been much more methodical in the study of the Kabbalah. It's particularly in rabbis, of course, that see the study, of course, as being an act of piety, along with following, the laws of Deuteronomy. So it's all part of being a good rabbi, and you have this sort of extra dimension to your living faith, which is the study of the Kabbalah. But of course, it does. A lot of other people have studied it now, particularly magical people involved in the Western magical tradition. Obviously, have studied it as well and put a lot of things, attached a lot of ideas to it that maybe rabbis wouldn't approve of. But okay, that I suppose is part of the course, really. Once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put it back in, and in the days of of openness and transparency, that's a double-edged sword, as we know. But I digress. So the point is, in this series, I'm going to look at each of these Sephirot, and look at each of these sort of phrases as they might go with the ideas around each Sephirot. When I first studied the Kabbalah, I kept on asking the question, well, what does this all mean? What has this all got to do with me and the universe and the planet and I don't know, mum and dad and my two brothers, and what's it got to do with I don't know, even I suppose when I was very young, talking about what's it got to do with magical powers, what magical powers am I going to get from it, and all this kind of stuff. So it opens. It's like thrill seekers need apply because it does attract thrill seekers and power mongers and I don't know, and megalomaniacs and people of disturbed psychological profiles. For definite. Look at me. I mean, I've studied it, so there we are. It's case in point, isn't it? And lots of people study the Kabbalah who shouldn't study the Kabbalah, and lots of people study don't study the Kabbalah because they're afraid of it, who perhaps would gain a lot of benefit from it. And I've always wondered what on earth the Sephirot actually mean. I mean, what ideas do they represent? And so after many years of studying, as I said, I've come up with these 10 affirmations, which I think cover the whole multiverse and one's relationship to the multiverse and to all the levels of reality. Just 10 simple words. And which is everything that I know about the Kabbalah, or sort of rolled into one. And so I thought I would just take each Sephirot as the Spirit inspired me, and talk about each Sephirot in connection with the meaning of the 10 words that I have assigned to the Sephirot. Sephirot are these red circles, by the way, and if you can call them circles or sort of ellipses. And in reality, of course, the Sephirot are like spinning wheels, in fact. So this is a static image, but in fact, the image, of course, is so complex and so and spinning, so dynamic that you couldn't possibly take it all in if you saw it in its actual true form. It's a bit like people looking down the throat of Krishna at the universal form of Krishna, and being rather terrified of it, because it is rather terrifying. It's too much to take in. So what you see here is a little tame version, a very, very tame version of what the Kabbalah actually is when you actually see it, which is why, cleanse the doors of perception. You have to be very pure and cleansed before you can see the tree of life in its true form. Otherwise, nasty things will happen to you. And all the things that you haven't cleansed about yourself will be amplified 100 million times. So all the things, all your fears and all your anxieties and hang-ups and issues will be seen much, much worse than they actually are. And in that hour, you will wish you hadn't been born, because it's like the trip of the lifetime, really, to see the tree of life. It's the acid trip of all acid trips. If you've ever done acid, which fortunately I have never done, because I haven't cleansed the doors of perception sufficiently in order to see the Kabbalah in its true form. Maybe you have, maybe you will, so that's good. Please, I beg you to do that, to cleanse your perceptions, to cleanse the doors of your perception very, very carefully indeed before you get into the study of the Kabbalah. Fortunately, there are all sorts of different levels of studying the Kabbalah. And my level has always been very, very superficial, because a little goes a long way with me, because I'm such an excitable person, that if I studied it too much, I go crazy, even more crazy than I am now. So I've studied the Kabbalah in a very superficial form, really. And I haven't looked at the Zohar much. I have the Zohar, but I haven't studied it very diligently at all. Sort of dipped into it really, which is pretty insulting to the spirit of the writings of the Kabbalah. No doubt. But I have problems if I study anything too intensely. I get so obsessed that I go crazy, things would not go well for me. So I have to be kind of guarded and study this thing very, very, very gently, very superficially, almost tritely, really. And I think a lot of people do have to, really. It's very few people that can study the Kabbalah in any sensible way and still maintain their sanity. They're already sane to start with, you see. They're always quite pragmatic people. It says that if you want to study the Kabbalah, you have to have a full stomach and you have to be have a partner and a job and be settled and have a home, be a housemaker and a house owner and all this kind of stuff and pay your taxes and be a regular guy or regular girl. Otherwise, you're just going, all your irregular thoughts are going to become more irregular. But nobody does. All the people that study the Kabbalah are all screwed up and have been through the centuries. And this is half the problem, really. You've got lots of screwed up people studying this stuff and then going crazier and crazier with it all, because you let loose something that you can't really or barely control and doesn't even want to be controlled anyway. With all these caveats, and I mean, I don't wish to make you afraid. And the other, of course, fear not. Just go with it, go with the flow, really. That's what I was taught by a shaman. If you have all these images and crazy thoughts running through your head, just go with them. Go with the flow of it all and the flow of the universe. Because if you try to resist, all sorts of things will appear much worse than they actually are. Black and white thinking, which is what you learn in cognitive behavior therapy, of course, because people that need CBT are absolutely incapable of seeing anything except through extreme emotional pair of spectacles, they just have no objectivity whatsoever. And you have to kind of wrestle objectivity from subjectivity in order to maintain a healthy balance, a balanced approach to this knowledge, to this what they call receiving, which Kabbalah means the receiving. But you have to be balanced in order to receive. Otherwise, you'll receive things that you just can't handle. Anyway, so if everybody says that, but nobody actually does it. All the people that study the Kabbalah are all crazy, are all completely nuts, really. When they say you have to be sane to study the Kabbalah, well, good luck with that. Good luck with finding that. I only hope, though, is that if lots of people study the Kabbalah, then more and more sane people will be attracted to its study. Rather than bonkers people. But unfortunately, we're not at that stage yet, and all we have is lots and lots of bonkers people studying Kabbalah, which is turning the whole place into a huge mental asylum or huge hippie colony, which is exactly the same thing. Anyway, so I'm going to take my time over this. I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to say, well, think down, I'm going to make a video on Yesod, if the spirit comes to me, then these talks are impromptu. They're just off the top of my head. They're just how I understand the Kabbalah. A lot of people will say you don't understand enough about Kabbalah, to which I will reply, well, nobody understands enough about the Kabbalah because, you may think it's just 10 spheres and 10 words. And you may think there's not much to study in the Kabbalah, but it's like one of those Russian dolls. You keep opening up the doll, and there's another doll underneath, and then you go on like that, sort of infinitum. Unfortunately, the amount of knowledge that you have grows exponentially until you have so much information coming at you that you don't know what to do with it all. And then you have to sort of condense it all down to its simplest form so that you can understand what the hell's going on. Or basically what in heaven's name is going on with yourself and with other people, with the universe itself. So I'm good. Maybe I'll start with Malkut because that's a good place to start, the beginning. Although some people say the beginning is Keter, which is the crown, which is the head of the tree of life. Well, it could be the beginning, but then of course, you could say there are 10 beginnings, and there are 10 centers, and there are 10 rims, and there are 10 endings. It's like in computer games where you have all these different endings to the game depending on how you conduct yourself throughout the game. I think that actually applies to Kabbalah as well. There are 10 different endings to the story, depending on what you do in life. Like a computer game. So I think that's important to understand as well. Um, there's a lot of metaphorical language in computer games because the people that develop them are quite into all this kind of stuff as well and have studied it. I know a lot about magic and Kabbalah and Western mysticism and Eastern mysticism for that matter. Okay, they make a joke out of it, so they make it like a sort of cartoon sort of story. But a lot of them do actually have quite a bit of knowledge. They actually know what they're talking about, um, about the story and everything. And then, of course, they get into computer coding, of course. So they're actually working with two sides of the brain. The one side of the brain, which is the computer coder, which is all technical, and the other side, which is all into all this kind of stuff, all this metaphysics. And they bring the two together to bring you some incredible games out there, which actually are sort of life changing, really. Even though they're games, they do have an incredible effect on people on many different levels. But anyway, I digress again. So, of course, when I do my impromptu talks, I'll be digressing and talking about loads of stuff. So, it'll either be terribly boring or terribly interesting as I try and pour my understanding into a sort of chalice, into 10 chalices, and present each chalice to you. And provided that I don't knock the chalice over as I'm talking about the chalice and spill all the contents everywhere, as long as I don't do that, we'll be all right, I think, just about. But I'm not going to force the issue. One thing I would say to you, don't try too hard with the Kabbalah. If you try and push things, and I've got to get this done, and I've got to get this done by a certain time, and I've got to be dutiful and diligent and all that. It doesn't work like that. It's a bit more chaotic than that, really. Um, there's lots of things that you can assign, and the correspondences are huge, vast tables of correspondences in Kabbalah, and everything is situational, it's context driven. So, for example, just very quickly, you could look at an object associated with Yesod, for example, and that object, is seen in context. That object has a political context, it has a social context, it has a psychological context. It relates to your mother and father and your siblings and your family generally. It relates to mythology. It relates to legends. It relates to popular culture. It relates to the imagination. It relates to science. It relates, everything in the Kabbalah is situation, and it relates to something in this world. Even though we talk about griffins and angels and I don't know what all and winged beings, those winged beings are studied in context, and they're studied, and they have an effect on the observer, and the observer has an effect on what is being observed as well. So you are basically directing this study because it is altering your perception, but your perception is altering also what you are perceiving in the Kabbalah. You see, and it's a kind of dynamic equilibrium between perceived and perceiver, as you know. So between student and subject, there is a dynamic equilibrium. Uh, and so therefore, there's no objectivity once you really get started, which is why things can get pretty hairy. If you're not sort of if you've got real psychological issues, then things could get very hairy, but also very dramatic and effective. I mean, great things can happen, but there might be things that almost kill you, kind of thing, or perhaps do kill you actually. Um, Kabbalah is not to be trifled with. Really, it's not a toy. Well, if it's a toy, but it has a dangerous component to it. There's no doubt about that. And yet, also that danger is not to be feared, because to fear that danger is to make that danger extremely annoyed with you, and it gets more dangerous. So fear not is a very, very important maxim in Kabbalah and in magic, because things don't like to be feared. They get angry. Yourself, if people fear you, don't trust you, it gets you annoyed, it gets you angry. And so it's a lot of these beings, the Kabbalistic beings, get angry if people are afraid of them, because they feel insulted by such fear. And yet they are quite boisterous and quite rough in the games that they play with people sometimes. So there is things to fear about them and things to mistrust even, but you can't show it. Because if you show the mistrust and fear, they just get worse, not better. And that's worse in inverted commas. But everything is for a reason. So everything that happens to us is for a reason. We are here to grow. We are here to explore. We are here to evolve. We are here to extol and exalt, uh, and experiment with. There's no doubt about that. But some of the experiments and explorations are hideously dangerous. Even though this Kabbalah might look really, really kind of simple and maybe look really banal, even, and you think, oh, what's that? It's just a tree of life, isn't it? It's nothing really. There's more to this than meets the eye. Kind of, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This little diagram. When you start wandering around this tree of life through the 22 paths and 10 Sephirot, you're going to find things that you just are absolutely amazing, absolutely terrifying, absolutely positive, and absolutely negative. And this is before you start on the reverse tree of life, which is access through Gebura. And when you start on the reverse tree of life, things get even wilder. So wild that people, generally Kabbalists, don't tend to go there, really. It's enough, basically, to study the Kabbalah as is. Never mind looking for the reverse of it. Never mind turning the tree upside down. That's things get really crazy after that. And not only do they get crazy for you, but they also get crazy for other people around you. You can imagine that in the laboratory of your mind, you're going to be playing with radioactive substances, and these substances are going to irradiate other people, co-workers and people outside the laboratory. So, you're playing with things which can actually harm other people. And that's when things get really hairy. And you've got to be really careful because, your decisions are not just going to affect yourself, but they're going to affect your loved ones and other people in the community. So be very, very careful with all this. I've tried to be careful, but sometimes I fail to be careful. But I do know that if you're going to study the tree of life, you've got to leave a lot of your baggage behind you at the door, because you've got to try and be as objective as you possibly can. And so subjectivity is something which is probably the thing that you should fear the most, your own subjectivity, your own self, actually. It isn't anything out there that you should fear. It's all the stuff that's in you that is projected out there and amplified by the various energies that are represented by the tree of life. Anyway, I've completely digressed, and this is a very poor introduction, probably, and a lot of information here is completely irrelevant, and I'll probably put you off studying Kabbalah completely as well, which is not my intention, because we are looking at we're looking at God Himself, or itself, or hers. We're looking at Spirit itself. And just looking at these 10 Sephirot for any amount of time, you've been looking at it whilst I've been nattering away, it's already had an effect on you, of which you are probably totally unaware, but which you may be aware of later, or you may dream of these 10 Sephirot tonight, in fact. And if you do dream of them, make careful note of that dream, because that will be you will receive very significant information about the tree of life, even though you may know nothing about it whatsoever. It will speak to you on one level or another.